Okay, so I have another clan battle, this time between BI and EC. This one is 1806, 1807 cores, so the 4th Coalition. Can't remember the name of this map, but it's one of the Russian ones. I have a love-hate relationship with this map because this area here is all forest, and forest over here, and all of that terrain is very slowing when you're attacking or moving troops. Coalition starts with a little bit of a terrain advantage, having this large deployment here where Imperial is spawned here. So if you bring a lot of guns with Russia, you can basically instantly attack with them 12 pounders down the road. This core is slightly isolated, but they have an equally large deployment zone. You can use the force to screen yourself if you don't want to like stay here and pull back. And then they have like a I'm in your walls deployment behind. So this deployment stretches quite a ways, and it is fully behind the Imperial armies. So in theory you have one army that can pin here, one army that could attack here or harass from here, and then another army to pin on this flank with a 4th army coming up from the rear. BI is playing the Imperials on this one. They have a mostly Guard Cav Corps. Lannes, Soult, and Mortier. And against them is Zezchwitz, Kostantin, Doktorov, and Gortchakov. I'm not quite sure the location of each of them. I just know that Zezchwitz is in the back. That's the Saxon corps that generally people try to use mostly the heavy cav for. Konstantin, unlike other Russian AC, the Russian Guard is actually split between all 3 of these. So you get a little bit of the Guard units in each one. They're also really big and quite useful. So otherwise you get decent mass with all 3 of these 1807 Russia cores and lots of guns. I personally think they could have squeezed in Bagration maybe and made him their center, and then maybe done like Lestok or something on the flank and just tried to weather a storm here. But that's just my personal choice. Bagration is quite good in this AC setup. He provides a lot of stars and a lot of mass. It does look like the French are going to try and do a push across the river here and then a flank around, and then have the Guard Cav Corps come up. Mortier's job is going to be to block whatever comes up behind him, while these 2 players try to isolate either this flank or this flank. Lannes overall is probably going to be very fast, yeah. Mostly light infantry build from Lannes, with the remainder being fairly quick lines, and then Udino's Grenadier reserves. Soult brought, I think it is his 1st division, but I could be wrong. Overall, Imperial will be lacking cav, even with a Guard Cav Corps. Like, yeah, they have Ledoux, but each of these 3 and Zezchwitz should all have access to medium and heavy cav and light cav. And all of it should be quite decently statted. So we'll see how it goes in terms of cav. Not having Mirat for 18067 now isn't the biggest deal given the current balance, but it does limit a little bit of your offensive power. It means that your infantry is going to have to do the heavy lifting, which isn't a bad thing, but... And if there's infantry that you want to do that with, it'd be Lannes and Soult, but again, we'll see how that goes. So the lack of 12-pounders or unicorns or whatever exploding right now tells me that they did bring a lot of guns, at least in this center position, which I think probably was a mistake. It might not be. Like, if you had unicorns, you could be hitting all of these troops even in the trees. 12-pounders may be less useful because of the amount of terrain debuffs. And you'll notice that most of this is still hidden. He did get spotted crossing the river, so they should have a pretty good idea of where the French armies are going, which is this direction. And it does look like this Russian player is going to come back this way to link up. This is generally the play. When I usually play this position, I try to screen with like maybe 2 L4s and some skirmishers in here, get artillery where this is to shoot down this alleyway, and then half arc through here, and then build up a good reserve here. And then this player, he can anchor on this house, but let them kind of swing themselves through. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what any of those units are. They're the Russians for this corps all look really, really similar, like, in general. I think the Guard has the little emblems on the front of their shakos and the red cuffs, but I could be wrong. So we already see that dragoons, more dragoons, and even more dragoons. This is a bit of an early push. I don't know if you'll get the maximum value out of charging dragoons against skirmishers. It's a little bit of a cross. Granted, he did charge the skirmisher, but the skirmisher was running away, and then that unit squared. So it wasn't necessarily intentional in this case. Dragoons again trying to go in. That one was definitely ambitious. When you have a fresh Lannes army coming at you, or any of these fresh French corps in 1806, attacking early on is not really going to pay off for you. They have too much morale, too high of stats. You gotta like grind them down to the point where your cav can actually do work.
Sir, our general
And
is
then
under attack.
This here is not playing into really the strengths of Russian infantry. These units probably are getting buffed by cover, and they're all good shooting infantry. These units are not good at shooting for the most part, and are now shooting into cover. So not really where you want to be with the Russians. And he understands that and is pulling back. This is the problem of not having a screen to kind of slow down the tempo. You're stuck now in the woods trying to pull away, and a much faster Lannes army is going to be catching up on your flank. So this is actually the first artillery I've seen. Saxon Cav is arriving. It's a good catch. Unfortunate that it's light cav, because again, it was a good catch. That's a lot of cav. I think that's one of the Russian Guard heavies, but again, I don't know the uniforms that well. On this flank, Mortier is doing what he's supposed to be doing, which is delaying this Russian army off on the flank. In theory, this is probably 5 versus either 9 or 7, which is a good trade for them. Russian cav going in on some grenadiers there. Again, this is a good play. Like, they caught the grenadier out of square and they forced a square on this light infantry and they got their infantry into melee, but this is too soon. That's a bit of a friendly cross. I would consider it one. Your unit is literally going through a friendly unit to get into melee. Again, trying to pressure their flanks. Control the French, but they're losing hemorrhaging units instead. The guns will have a bad time, especially at these stats. Trying to shoot into forests. A little bit of cav play here on the side. Servants.
Yes, sir.
They honestly probably could have taken this cav fight and won and wiped out all of the guard cav, but it is risky. Especially with the infantry, probably going to be able to pour volleys in from the side. This Russian army is more or less contained. And this one is... Again, I feel like they just need to pull back at this point. Cav won't do much in forests. The charge is too slow, and because the models will get stuck on trees and things, there's a really high chance your cav will get accidentally FIM'd and, or fired in melee on accident, because only part of the unit will actually make contact. These guns seem to be doing nothing. I'm not actually sure if they're even hitting anything. This is a lot of French infantry stacked up on this side. So now it's a rush for these Russians to come back across the road. They have a better, you know, line of communication to get back into the fight over here. Mortier has to travel cross-country, but honestly he's fast enough to probably still beat them. So another square form. That's for sure Russian Guard. Big, big unit. Again, I think it's too early. Like, this unit's basically fresh, and it's the terribles. Backed by Soult and Lannes for stars. Like, I don't... Like, yeah, the Russians are good in melee, but so is this unit. But it has equally supported better morale. And now you're getting Dragoons massacred. This guard unit, or Grenadier, just got point blanked. I mean, this is a scary attack, all things considered. It's just, I think it's too soon. And here's what I mean by Cav has difficulties charging in forests. Like, maybe 4 of those models are actually attached right now. And this attack has been completely rebuffed. The guard's broken. This unit is pulling back because they realize that they aren't winning. These units over here are just getting absolutely demolished by this light infantry. And there's an overwhelming number of infantry on this flank. I mean, the coalition has thrown away their center. Their center is absolutely broken at this point, that they probably don't even need to push this flank. They can just walk through the center and finish them off. The Saxon infantry is arriving, but, you know, with this much Saxon cav, the infantry is probably not that great of quality. This is a guard unit on the flank. But they're shooting in forests, so it's not getting that great of a damage on this infantry, as you can see. They've been shooting at them, some pretty good volleys. The cav's done more damage just now than that guard infantry did. Lydia coming in to exploit the center. Not quite enough. They do have still a lot of cav. Saxon heavies. Dragoons routed off on this flank. So again, the Russians are in a bad position to be able to even check this advance. As you can see, the forest line basically ends here. The Russians are right outside of it, so they're taking all of the damage while shooting into the woods, barely dealing any. You can probably like watch these guys tick down compared to the French here, taking almost 0 losses. And that's where terrain and things like that really matter. Mortier was able to actually beat the Russians to secure this flank. And now we have basically a line grind fest. With the Russians already having lost a lot of their technical elements and some of their guard troops and things along those lines. You know, units are coming back, but units like this have taken pretty terrible losses. More cav coming in. It's a good catch on these non-squaring armies. And this is a well-coordinated charge. 1-to-1 on each side. Another one coming in.
Our men are running.
Not sure where this unit's going. Another good charge here. Now this is like where the attack is actually working well. It was a nice coordinated assault here. The French are out of position. The coalition is using their cav advantage well.
Our men are running, sir.
Guard cav is streaming in to kind of stem the tide here. And this is where, you know, if you build up the attack and get your damage in and slowly grind in, they've basically destroyed half of Soult's army here. If not all of Soult. No, just half. It's a good counterattack though.
Our men
It's
are
just
running, sir.
pursuing this into the tree line is now going to be difficult. And with how many different units are overlapping and things along those lines, it'll get really, really hard. This is what I mean by, you know, fighting in and around woods is difficult. This cav is trying to click the right unit, but you can't actually see how much infantry is there. Ledu in the center. That was basically their only chance to come back at this one. And it looks like most of the French are coming back as well. A lot of these units will rally. The Saxons not doing too hot in the shootout. These units are definitely well below half strength. I mean, if you just look at how much cav these guys have, you can see that the focus would have been on the cavalry. I don't think the coalition brought really any artillery at all, which is really strange for what's generally considered one of the biggest army or arty spam factions, is 1807 Russia. You could have at least used the guns here, but, I mean, the French did do a big wide flank, but you could have drawn them out of the woods and into your guns, or pushed them back using the guns, etc.
The men are fatigued, sir, and must rest awhile.
in an open fight, you know, like these big guard units will actually make their value. But when they're shooting in the trees, that's when they aren't doing too hot. Mortier's been putting in some pretty decent damage against this core over here. The guard finally arrives. That's probably going to be it for this Russian army in the center. Looks like they tried to use the cav on the flank. Honestly, a lot of people like to try and use cav to attack flank units. It's almost guaranteed, if you're going to try and roll the dice, that a unit on the flank is going to square. Versus units in the center, people think are safe. That was a little bit of a weird charge, but it was charging through routing units. See, this entire line, all of the squares are on the outside, so attacking centrally sometimes really pays off. Same here. If the heavy cav had hit here instead of over here, you know, this probably would have routed all of these units. It's good work from BI. They basically were able to shape the battlefield again how they wanted to, which is common for Imperial. They did a nice wide flank with Lannes using his speed. Soult, also using speed, was able to shift over quickly and then angle himself here and anchor in the woods. They utilized the good French stats to kind of force the hand of EC into attacking them. I think EC should have just kept pulling backwards into the open where they could have had a better chance to utilize their cav. This map, again, isn't really great for cav to begin with, so not having a lot of guns puts them in a bind, and where I think, you know, like Bagration having 3,700 men or 4,000 men in the center with guns and dragoons supported on the flanks by, you know, Lestok or whatever else. You could still bring Zezchwitz, and I think you could still bring, like, in the, Kostantin.
We have killed their general, sir.
And then
Now
maybe,
they
like,
must
Lestok.
break.
But Bagration probably would have held a little bit better with his stars. It's really, I think it comes down to also the lack of guns for Coalition in this case. You gotta really wear down the French. Maybe snipe their gens. But get them to a point where, you know, you're not charging a fresh 12 morale, 16 melee defense or something ridiculous infantry with 9 stars behind it. Like, you're not gonna break that. These units will fight down to what it here 59 of 160. I mean, that's not even that low, but some of these units will legitimately fight down to 10-15 men. So you saw here in the center when the coalition did make a fairly successful attack and a very coordinated attack at the beginning, the units will break, but you have to get to the point where they're worn down enough and you can flip the script on the Imperial armies, which is really, really hard to do in this core. Like, for sure, one of the most difficult to do.
We have killed their general, sir.
But
now they must break.
It does look like a resounding victory for the Imperial army, which, again, not too surprising with 1806, 7 cores. The Russians do stand a better chance, but you have to really rely on their strengths of guns and things like that. Not having Murat made this a little bit more interesting because the coalition had a clear cav advantage. but it's more or less negated by the map. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll have a couple more reviews because there have been a couple more games. Thanks again.